At Brighton Medical Center, a revolutionary AI system promises to reshape healthcare forever. Designed to provide fast, accurate diagnoses, it is hailed as the future of medicine, a tool doctors can trust to save time and lives. But for Dr. Marcus Brown, a dedicated physician with years of experience, the shiny new technology hides a troubling flaw. When Marcus begins to notice a pattern, Black patients and women being consistently misdiagnosed or deprioritized, his instincts tell him something is deeply wrong. His warnings, however, are met with cold indifference. Accused of sabotaging innovation, Marcus is cast aside, his concerns dismissed as paranoia. Yet, when a young boy's life hangs in the balance, Marcus must choose between following the system or trusting his gut, no matter the cost. What happens when we put our faith in machines designed with human flaws? How far will one man go to expose the truth when powerful forces fight to keep it buried? Dr. Marcus Brown's alarm clock buzzed at 5 a.m., a low hum that blended into the steady creaks of his modest apartment. The early morning light seeped through thin blinds, tracing shadows on the cracked walls of his small living room. Marcus sat up on his worn-out couch, which doubled as his bed most nights. The apartment, though tidy, carried the weight of years spent prioritizing others over himself. A stack of patient files lay open on the coffee table, next to a cup of lukewarm coffee that had been forgotten the night before. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his close-cropped hair. Life was not unkind to Marcus, but it was unrelenting. A proud man in his early 40s, Marcus had worked tirelessly to become a trusted physician. He had long given up on luxuries, trading personal comfort for a relentless pursuit of his calling saving lives. Yet, as he looked around the sparsely furnished room, with its peeling paint and mismatched furniture, he felt the quiet hum of emptiness. "Another day," he muttered, standing to stretch his stiff back. He lived alone, save for his 2-year-old rescue cat Oliver, who purred in a ball on the windowsill. Marcus often thought the cat had more peace than most people he knew. He quickly dressed, pulling on his well-pressed scrubs and sliding a faded photo of his late parents into his pocket. They had taught him everything about perseverance. Even in hardship, they had built a home filled with love and integrity. The walk to Brighton Medical Center was brisk. Marcus preferred the 40-minute stroll to public transportation, relishing the quiet of the early morning streets. As he approached the massive hospital, gleaming against the pale sky, he paused. Banners hung proudly across the entrance, announcing the debut of Mediscan AI, a state-of-the-art diagnostic system designed to revolutionize medicine. "Faster, smarter, better," read the bold letters above the automatic glass doors. Inside, the staff buzzed with excitement. Nurses, doctors, and administrators gathered in clusters, sharing their hopes for what the AI could bring. No more guessing. No more human error. No more overworked nights. The marketing had worked wonders. Everyone seemed eager to embrace the technology that promised perfect diagnoses at record speed. Marcus quietly slipped through the crowd, making his way to the ER floor where he spent most of his days. The cheerful chatter outside contrasted the usual chaos of the emergency ward. Here, life moved fast and unpredictable, every second a tightrope between life and death. "Morning, Dr. Brown," called Lisa Carter, the charge nurse. Lisa was a stout woman in her 50s, with a voice that carried across rooms and a kindness that made her beloved among patients and staff. "Morning, Lisa." Marcus smiled faintly, his mind already wandering to the day ahead. "Big day, huh?" Lisa added, holding a clipboard. "That fancy AI system is taking over today. They say it'll make our jobs easier." Marcus nodded but said nothing. He wasn't against progress. He simply trusted his years of experience more than a machine. He had seen too many systems fail to believe in perfection. The day's first patient arrived within minutes. Marcus scanned the intake chart. Mr. Thomas Caldwell, age 70, chest pain. He found the elderly black man slouched in a chair in the waiting area, his face lined with both age and discomfort. Marcus approached with calm assurance. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Dr. Brown. Let's get you checked out." The man rose slowly, wincing. "Thank you, doctor. This chest pain feels like an elephant's been sitting on me since last night." Marcus guided him to an exam room. Mediscan AI's console sat prominently in the corner, its sleek screen glowing with a silent confidence that almost mocked Marcus's presence. Following the new hospital protocol, Marcus entered Mr. Caldwell's symptoms into the system. Within moments, the AI spat out a result. Non-urgent. Possible indigestion. Marcus frowned. Something didn't sit right. He studied Mr. Caldwell carefully, considering his shortness of breath, his pale lips, the way he winced when adjusting his posture. Marcus's instincts screamed at him. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm going to run some additional tests just to be sure," Marcus said. The elderly man nodded weakly. "I trust you, doctor." Ignoring the AI's recommendation, Marcus ordered an electrocardiogram, EKG, and blood work. An hour later, the results confirmed Marcus's suspicions. Acute myocardial infarction. A heart attack's. Marcus's chest tightened with anger. "We need to get him into the cath lab immediately," he barked to Lisa. "Right away," she responded, springing into action. As Mr. Caldwell was wheeled off for emergency intervention, Marcus lingered by the AI console, staring at its cold clinical screen. "You got it wrong," he murmured bitterly. Later that day, Marcus brought his concern to Dr. Adams, the hospital's chief of technology and the program's biggest advocate. Dr. Adams was tall and charismatic, a man who wore his suits as if they were armor. His office overlooked the city skyline, offering a view that suggested control and power. "Marcus, you need to trust the system," Dr. Adams said smoothly, dismissing Marcus's frustration with a wave of his hand. "Mediscan AI is cutting edge. Maybe you misread the patient's symptoms. Human error happens, you know." Marcus's jaw tightened. "With respect, I didn't misread anything. The AI misdiagnosed Mr. Caldwell. If I hadn't intervened, he might not have survived." Adams leaned back, his polished smile faltering. "These things take time to perfect. Trust the data, not your emotions. The AI has been rigorously tested." "And what about real-world patients who don't fit neatly into its algorithms?" Marcus countered. "We need to monitor its decisions, not follow it blindly." Adams's tone turned colder. "Dr. Brown, are you saying you refuse to work with the new system? That you would undermine a program the hospital has invested millions into?" Marcus hesitated. He understood the subtext. His job, his career, depended on how he answered. "I'm not saying that," he replied carefully. "I'm saying we need to do better for the patients." Adams sighed dramatically, as if worn out by Marcus's defiance. "I'll make a note of your concerns, but don't let this distract you. Mediscan is the future. Don't stand in its way." That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment, staring at the reports spread across his coffee table. Each page detailed patient outcomes from the past 2 weeks. Patterns began to emerge. Black patients, in particular, received concerningly lower priority diagnoses. His heart sank. He had seen systemic bias throughout his career, but to see it embedded in something that claimed to be objective was a gut punch. How could he explain this to people who refused to listen? A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Lisa, holding a brown paper bag and wearing her usual no-nonsense expression. "I figured you hadn't eaten," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. She set the bag down and handed him a sandwich. "You looked like you needed this." Marcus blinked, momentarily speechless. "Lisa, you didn't have to—" "Oh, hush. I know what you're doing. You're sitting here brooding about the AI system. I saw what happened today. You were right to follow your gut." Marcus stared at her, gratitude catching in his throat. "Thank you, Lisa. I mean it." She sat across from him, eyeing the files. "You're on to something, aren't you?" He nodded slowly. I think the system's biased, but prove it one patient at a time, she said firmly. You've always trusted your instincts, Marcus. Don't stop now. As Lisa left, Marcus felt a small flicker of warmth in his chest. Unexpected kindness often came when he needed it most. The world felt a little less lonely. With a renewed sense of resolve, Marcus turned back to the files. One patient at a time, he repeated to himself, and so it began. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Brighton Medical Center earlier than usual. The hospital always felt different before dawn, quiet, almost reflective. The sterile lights of the ER were dimmed, the monitors beeped softly, and the steady hum of ventilators filled the air. Marcus often found comfort in these moments, as if the hospital itself was taking a breath before the chaos began again. With a fresh coffee in hand, he settled into his small office, tucked away behind the ER's break room. He glanced at the stack of files he had compiled the night before, pages of diagnoses and outcomes, patterns he could no longer ignore. Marcus's instincts rarely failed him. They were honed over years of working with patients who didn't always present symptoms the way textbooks described. The AI was impressive, yes, but it lacked the humanity to see what lay beneath the surface. Just as he was about to organize his notes, a knock broke the silence. It was Lisa, holding her clipboard like a weapon, as usual. "Morning, Dr. Brown," she said in her no-nonsense tone, though her eyes softened when she saw his tired face. "Rough night?" He smiled faintly. "Something like that. What's the schedule today?" "Busy," she replied, flipping through the pages. 3 traumas, 6 admissions, and Metascans already calling most of them non-critical. You know how it goes now, AI first, humans second. Marcus felt a sting of frustration. "What about the woman I asked about yesterday, Cynthia Moore?" Lisa's brow furrowed. "Appendix ruptured. You caught it just in time, but the AI labeled her as low priority. We barely got her to the OR." Marcus clenched his jaw. Cynthia had been young, healthy, except for the clear signs of distress that any experienced doctor could have seen. If he hadn't followed his instincts, she might have been another quiet tragedy blamed on complications. "Did anyone say anything about it?" he asked. Lisa shook her head. "Dr. Adams isn't budging, keeps saying the system is 95% accurate. But 95 isn't 100, Marcus. Tell that to the 5%. The morning rush began in earnest, flooding the ER with patients from all walks of life: an elderly man with pneumonia, a toddler with a fever, and a young black man, Dante Richardson, who limped in holding his side. "Car accident," the EMT reported, wheeling Dante into an exam room. "Minor external injuries. Mediscan says bruised ribs, non-urgent." Marcus scanned the patient quickly. Dante, barely 20, winced with every shallow breath. His skin looked clammy, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. Marcus's gut tightened. "Bruised ribs don't cause this kind of distress," Marcus murmured to Lisa as they prepped Dante. "Let's get him on a monitor and order a chest x-ray." "You're pulling rank on the AI again?" she teased lightly, though her tone carried a hint of approval. "Call it a hunch." Minutes later, the X-ray revealed what Marcus had feared: a hemothorax, internal bleeding around the lung. It was subtle, but deadly if left untreated. "Page surgery," Marcus ordered quickly. As Lisa made the call, Marcus sat beside Dante, who now lay hooked to oxygen. The young man's breath had eased slightly. "You're going to be okay," Marcus reassured him. "We caught it in time." Dante looked up, his voice weak but grateful. "Thanks, Doc. I knew something wasn't right." Marcus squeezed his shoulder lightly before stepping out of the room. Lisa met him in the hallway, her expression unreadable. "You saved another one," she said quietly. "The system said he was fine," Marcus replied, bitterness creeping into his tone. Lisa glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. "Marcus, How many of these cases are you going to find before someone listens? This is the third one this week. I don't know, he admitted. But if I don't say something, who will? That afternoon, Marcus found himself standing in front of Dr. Adams's office again, the files tucked tightly under his arm. He hesitated for a moment before knocking. "Come in," came Adams's clipped voice. Inside, the office felt colder than before. Dr. Adams sat at his pristine desk, flanked by two large monitors displaying graphs and data reports. He barely looked up as Marcus entered. "Dr. Brown," Adams said, finally meeting his eyes, "what brings you here again?" "I need to talk to you about Mediscan," Marcus began, keeping his voice calm and measured. "This is the third case this week where the AI downplayed a patient's condition. It's missing things, Adams things that could kill people if we're not careful." Adams sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Marcus, I understand you have concerns, but you're overreacting. The system is trained on thousands of cases. It's more accurate than any single doctor." "Not when it comes to minority patients," Marcus shot back. "Look at these." He placed the files on the desk. "These aren't random mistakes. Black patients are consistently being misdiagnosed or labeled as lower priority." Adams's face hardened. "Those are serious accusations, Marcus. You're saying the AI is biased? That's impossible. Machines don't discriminate." Marcus leaned forward, his frustration boiling over. "Machines reflect the data we give them. If the training data is flawed, the outcomes will be flawed too. I don't care how advanced the system is, if we trust it blindly, we're going to lose people." Adams stood abruptly, his calm veneer cracking. "I've heard enough. The hospital board has invested millions in Mediscan, and it's already improving efficiency. We can't afford to undermine confidence in the system because of a handful of outliers." "Outliers," Marcus repeated, stunned. "These are people's lives, Adams. How many more?" "That's enough," Adams barked. "I won't have you spreading doubt among the staff. You need to focus on doing your job, not questioning hospital policy. Am I clear?" The room fell silent. Marcus stared at Adams, feeling the weight of the warning settle on his shoulders. "Yes, sir," he said finally, his voice tight. That evening, Marcus sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a half-eaten sandwich. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, adding to the emptiness he felt. He was furious, but more than that, he felt powerless. How could he fight a system no one wanted to question? As he picked at the crust of his bread, Lisa appeared at his table, sliding a bottle of water toward him. "You look like you're about to collapse," she said softly. Marcus glanced up, surprised to see the concern in her eyes. "I'm fine." "Liar," she said bluntly. She sat down across from him and leaned in. "You did the right thing today. That kid, Dante, you saved his life. You're not alone in this, Marcus. Some of us see what you're seeing." Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. Lisa's unexpected kindness was a balm to the frustration that had been building inside him. "Thanks, Lisa," he said quietly. "I needed to hear that." "You're not wrong," she added. "And maybe it's time more of us started speaking up. Just be careful. Adams doesn't play fair, and you know it." Marcus nodded, her words lingering as he sat in the quiet cafeteria. He thought of Dante, Cynthia, and Mr. Caldwell, people who might not be here if he had followed protocol. The weight of it all sat heavy on his chest, but beneath it, something stirred. Resolve. Marcus stood, picking up his files with newfound determination. If no one else would listen, he would find a way to make them. The air in Brighton Medical Center's emergency ward grew heavier with each passing day. Marcus could feel it, a silent weight pressing against him, as though the walls themselves disapproved of his growing skepticism. Everyone else seemed content with the Mediscan AI. It hummed along smoothly, spitting out diagnoses like clockwork, while doctors praised the reduced workload. Efficiency had become the new gospel. But Marcus couldn't shake the memory of Dante Richardson lying pale and clammy, or Cynthia Moore's ruptured appendix. The AI had nearly failed them, and he had no doubt others would slip through its cracks if someone didn't pay attention. That morning, Marcus stood by the nurse's station, flipping through patient charts when Lisa appeared at his side, balancing 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Thought you could use this," she said, handing him one. Marcus took it gratefully. "You're a lifesaver, Lisa." "You're welcome, doctor," she said with a wry smile. Then, more seriously, she added, "How are you holding up?" Marcus glanced around before answering. The ward was buzzing, filled with nurses and orderlies moving between rooms. He kept his voice low. "I'm fine. Just tired of being stonewalled." "You talked to Adams again?" He nodded. "He doesn't want to hear it. He says I'm undermining confidence in the system." Lisa frowned deeply. "That's what they say when they want to shut you up. But you're right, Marcus. I see it too. Something's off with that AI." Before Marcus could respond, the sliding glass doors to the ER opened, and a woman burst through, nearly shouting in desperation, "Help! Somebody helps us!" She was clutching the arm of a young boy, no older than 15. The boy, Jamal Carter, hunched forward, clutching his chest and gasping for air. His mother, frantic and tear-streaked, kept repeating his name. "Jamal, baby! Hold on!" Marcus was the first to reach them. "Let's get him to room 4, he said, helping support the boy's weight. Lisa followed quickly, her eyes sharp and focused. In the exam room, Marcus worked swiftly. Jamal's breathing was shallow, and his pulse was rapid and weak. The teenager looked up at Marcus with terrified eyes, sweat trickling down his temples. "Jamal, I need you to stay calm," Marcus said gently. "We're going to figure out what's wrong." He turned to Lisa. "Vitals." Lisa read the monitor. "Heart rate is 130. BP's dropping, 90/60. Marcus frowned. Chest pain and low blood pressure were never a good combination. "Let's get a chest x-ray and order blood work immediately. Page the radiology tech now." Lisa nodded, moving quickly, but the moment she stepped out, the Metascan console chirped. Marcus turned to see the diagnosis flash across its screen. Non-critical. Suspected anxiety-induced hyperventilation. Marcus stared at the screen, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Not again. He looked down at Jamal, who now looked worse. His breaths were growing shorter, and his face paled by the minute. Marcus knew anxiety didn't cause this. Something more serious was happening, something the AI couldn't see. "Lisa," he called. She returned almost immediately. "What's the AI saying?" she asked, already knowing the answer from the look on his face. "Non-critical," Marcus muttered bitterly. "It's wrong. Again." Lisa didn't argue. She trusted Marcus's instincts. "What do you need me to do?" "Get me a portable ultrasound machine," Marcus said. "We're not waiting for the X-ray. Something's not right." As Lisa rushed out, Marcus sat beside Jamal, resting a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Hey, Jamal, can you tell me exactly where it hurts?" Jamal grimaced. "Right here," he whispered, pointing to the center of his chest. "It's like something's pushing down." Marcus's gut twisted. It sounded like something he'd seen before: an aortic dissection, a tear in the major artery that carries blood from the heart. It was rare in someone Jamal's age, but not impossible. And if he was right, every second counted. Lisa returned, pushing the ultrasound machine into the room. Marcus wasted no time. He applied the gel and gently ran the probe over Jamal's chest, his eyes scanning the screen intently. It didn't take long for the image to reveal what he feared: blood pooling around the heart. "Pericardial effusion," Marcus muttered to himself. The AI had missed it entirely. Jamal's condition was critical. If they didn't intervene immediately, the pressure would stop his heart from beating. Marcus stormed into the hallway, catching a passing surgical resident, Dr. Emily Chen. Get a cardiothoracic surgeon now. Tell them we have a pericardial effusion, and the patient needs an emergency pericardiocentesis. Dr. Chen blinked in surprise but didn't hesitate. On it. Lisa met Marcus in the hallway. What's happening? It's bad, but we caught it, Marcus said firmly. We need to drain the blood around his heart. If we wait any longer… He didn't finish the thought. Lisa's face paled slightly. Thank God you checked. What if you hadn't… Don't go there, Marcus said, cutting her off. He couldn't think about it. Not now. Minutes later, the surgical team arrived and wheeled Jamal into the OR. His mother stood outside the doors, tears streaming down her face as she gripped Marcus's arm. Is he going to be okay? She choked out. Marcus met her eyes and answered honestly, his voice steady. He's in the best hands now. We caught it in time. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Thank you for listening to him. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. Listening. That was all it had taken. But how many others were being ignored because of their trust in a machine? Hours later, Jamal's surgery was declared a success. Marcus stood outside the recovery room, watching through the glass as the boy's mother held his hand, relief written across her face. Lisa appeared at his side, holding 2 more cups of coffee. You did good today, Doc, she said softly. Marcus exhaled deeply. I'm just glad we caught it. Lisa handed him the coffee and gave him a look that made him pause. You know what this means, right? What? She glanced around before answering. It means you're right. Something's seriously wrong with that AI. You're saving lives by following your instincts. Not everyone would go against the grain like you did today. Marcus stared at his reflection in the glass, the faint outline of Jamal and his mother just beyond it. And how many people won't speak up when they see it? How many people will trust the system over their gut? Lisa didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. That night, Marcus sat in his small apartment again, the light of his desk lamp illuminating the files spread in front of him. He looked down at Jamal's chart and compared it to the Mediscan printout, the word non-critical practically mocking him. Machines were supposed to make life easier, but Marcus couldn't shake the growing sense that they had overlooked something vital. Humanity. Understanding. Context. An algorithm couldn't measure the quiet desperation in a mother's voice or the instinct honed by years of experience. He leaned back, exhaustion tugging at him. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if it was worth it, if challenging the system alone would change anything. Then he thought of Jamal, alive and recovering, and his mother's tearful gratitude. Marcus grabbed his notebook and began writing, listing each case where the AI had failed. If no one else would listen, he would make them listen. One patient at a time, one case at a time. Because lives depended on it. The days following Jamal's emergency surgery passed in a blur of tension. Marcus kept his head down, focusing on his work while quietly compiling evidence. Each case where Mediscan AI had failed sat in a growing file in his small office, thick enough now that it barely closed. He had data. He had real patients. He had proof. And yet, no one wanted to listen. Lisa was the only person he could count on, the only one who understood what was at stake. You're going to have to confront them again, Marcus, she said quietly one afternoon as they stood outside the nurse's station. I know, Marcus replied, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one else could hear. But Adams won't budge. To him, this AI system is a miracle. He doesn't care who it leaves behind. Lisa frowned, her fingers tapping against the clipboard she held. He might not, but you need to push harder. This is about patience, not politics. You know that. Marcus knew she was right. He had spent years fighting for the people others overlooked, patients who didn't always fit the textbook definition of illness, patients who didn't have money or power to demand attention. And now, a machine was doing what bad policies and bias had always done, dismissing the most vulnerable. That evening, Marcus walked the halls of the ER during the late shift. The hospital at night felt different, quieter, shadows stretching long across the white floors. He passed by room 4, where Jamal had been just days before. Marcus paused, his heart heavy with the memory of the boy gasping for air, overlooked by an AI that should have saved him. "You did the right thing," Lisa had said. "But what about next time?" He tightened his grip on the file he carried. There couldn't be a next time. The next morning, Marcus made his choice. He stood outside Dr. Adams's office, file in hand, his heart pounding. The logical part of his brain told him to stop, to let it go. But his instincts, those same instincts that had saved lives, pushed him forward. He knocked twice and stepped inside. Dr. Adams looked up from his computer, his expression tight with impatience. "Marcus, I wasn't expecting you." "We need to talk," Marcus said firmly, closing the door behind him. Adams leaned back, clearly irritated. "If this is about your concerns with Mediscan again—" "It is," Marcus interrupted. He placed the file on Adams's desk. "This is a record of every case where the AI got it wrong. I've got names, symptoms, and outcomes. This isn't a theory anymore, Adams. It's a problem." Adams didn't look at the file. "Marcus, you're becoming obsessed. AI isn't perfect. No system is. But it's better than anything we've had before. These are statistical anomalies." "Anomalies?" Marcus's voice rose. "Jamal Carter nearly died because of that system. Cynthia Moore's appendix ruptured. Mr. Caldwell could have had a fatal heart attack. Are they just anomalies to you?" Adams's face darkened. "You need to watch your tone." Marcus stepped forward, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "We are talking about human lives, and you're more worried about keeping the hospital's shiny new toy intact. If we don't fix this now, people are going to get hurt, people who rely on us to do the right thing." Adams stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's enough, Marcus. You're making accusations without understanding how this works. You're undermining confidence in this hospital, and that stops now." Marcus stared at him, stunned. "Undermining confidence?" "Yes," Adams snapped. "The board won't tolerate this kind of disruption. You're creating panic, and it's going to cost us. I'm warning you, drop this before it's too late." The words hung heavy in the air. Marcus's chest tightened as the threat settled over him. "And if I don't?" Adam's voice turned icy. "You're an excellent physician, Marcus, but you're not irreplaceable. I suggest you remember that." Marcus walked out of Adams's office, his mind racing. The hallway felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in around him. He didn't stop until he reached the ER, where the steady rhythm of the ward grounded him again. Patients still needed him. That hadn't changed. "Hey, Doc," a familiar voice called. Marcus turned to see Lisa leaning against the nurse's station, arms crossed. "What happened?" Marcus hesitated before shaking his head. "He's not going to listen. He told me to drop it or face the consequences." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "That's not right, Marcus. You're trying to save lives, and they're treating you like you're causing trouble." "It doesn't matter," Marcus said, his voice low but resolute. "I'm not dropping it." She stared at him for a long moment, as if searching his face for something. Then, with a small nod, she leaned in closer. "You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, you've got someone in your corner." The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. Lisa didn't owe him anything, but her quiet support reminded him that kindness often came when you least expected it. It gave him strength when the world seemed determined to knock him down. That evening, Marcus sat in his office, staring at the open file spread across his desk. Outside, the ER buzzed with activity, the constant hum of patients coming and going. He thought of all the people he'd fought for, people who wouldn't have had a chance if he hadn't stepped in. His eyes landed on a new intake report. Andre Williams, age 48, presenting with shortness of breath and fatigue. Marcus felt a chill. The description reminded him of Mr. Caldwell's case, the heart attack the AI had missed. He stood quickly, grabbing the chart and heading toward room 6. Inside, Andre Williams sat propped up on the bed, his breathing labored. He was a tall man, his face lined with exhaustion. "Doc," he said between shallow breaths, "it's been like this for 2 days. I thought it was just the flu, but it's not getting better." Marcus studied him carefully, his instincts stirring again. "Let's run a few tests and get you checked out, okay?" He entered Andre's symptoms into Mediscan AI and watched the console process the data. Seconds later, the result appeared. Non-critical. Viral fatigue. Marcus's hands clenched. Not again. "Lisa," he called from the hallway. She appeared instantly, her expression sharp. "What is it?" "We're going to need a full workup on Mr. Williams," Marcus said. "Order blood work, an EKG, and a chest X-ray. I think something's wrong with his heart." Lisa's brow furrowed. "The AI said non-critical." "I know what it said," Marcus replied firmly, "but I don't trust it." Lisa didn't hesitate. "I'll get the tests ordered." An hour later, the results came back. Marcus stared at the report, his stomach sinking. Elevated troponin levels. Abnormal EKG. It was exactly what he feared. Andre was showing signs of a heart attack. Marcus immediately called for a cardiologist and arranged for intervention. As the team wheeled Andre to the cath lab, Marcus sat beside the man briefly, squeezing his shoulder. "We're going to take care of you, Mr. Williams." Andre looked up, his face lined with relief. "Thank you, Doc. I knew something wasn't right." By the time Marcus left the hospital that night, exhaustion clung to him like a shadow. He walked home slowly, the quiet of the streets amplifying his thoughts. He had trusted his instincts and saved another life, but Adams's threat still echoed in his mind. As he climbed the stairs to his small apartment, Marcus noticed something unusual. A paper bag sat at his door. He picked it up and looked inside a warm, homemade meal and a handwritten note. "Keep doing what's right. Some of us see you. L." Marcus stood there for a moment, the knot in his chest loosening just a bit. It wasn't much, but it reminded him that even when the odds felt impossible, kindness could light the way. Inside, Marcus sat at his table, the note beside him as he ate. He didn't know how he would convince the hospital to listen, but one thing was certain: he wouldn't stop fighting. Because someone had to. The next morning, Marcus sat on the edge of his couch, staring blankly at the wall. The note from Lisa lay on his coffee table, crumpled from the way he had held it overnight. It had been a small act, one homemade meal, a few words scribbled on paper, but it anchored him in a way he couldn't explain. Keep doing what's right. He took a deep breath before getting ready for work, willing himself to push through. Today was going to be harder than usual. Adams's warning loomed over him, and Marcus knew he was running out of time. He couldn't keep ignoring protocol without consequences. But the alternative, trusting a flawed system, was unthinkable. As he stepped into the ER, the familiar buzz of activity greeted him. The hum of voices, the squeak of gurney wheels, and the occasional muffled groan from patients created a chaotic symphony. For most, it was just another day. For Marcus, the tension was sharper, a quiet hum of dread in the background. Lisa caught his eye as he dropped his bag in the break room. She gave him a small nod, her usual way of checking in without saying too much. It was their unspoken understanding now she had his back, no matter what. Mid-morning, Marcus was halfway through checking on a patient when the charge nurse called him urgently over the intercom. "Dr. Brown to room 7, stat." He grabbed his stethoscope and hurried down the hall, his heart picking up speed. When he stepped into the room, he found a young black woman, no older than 30, lying on the bed. Her name on the intake chart read Danielle Harper. Danielle's face was tight with pain, her hands clutching her abdomen as she breathed heavily. "It hurts so bad," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "What happened?" Marcus asked Lisa, who was already at the monitor. She came in complaining of severe abdominal pain. AI says possible gastritis. Non-urgent. Marcus's jaw tightened. He glanced at Danielle, her face pale, her body curled protectively. It didn't look like simple gastritis. He moved quickly, gently palpating her abdomen. Danielle, does it hurt more when I press here? She nodded, biting her lip to keep from crying out. Marcus's instincts flared like a warning bell. Order a full blood panel, type and cross-match, and prep for imaging. We need an ultrasound to check for internal bleeding. Lisa hesitated. The AI said, I don't care what it said, Marcus interrupted, keeping his voice low and steady. Something's not right. Lisa nodded, already moving. I'll call imaging. Danielle looked up at Marcus, her voice trembling. Is it bad? I'm not sure yet, he said honestly, resting a hand on her shoulder. But we're going to figure it out. I promise. The ultrasound confirmed Marcus's worst fear. A ruptured ectopic pregnancy. The fertilized egg had implanted outside the uterus, and now internal bleeding was threatening Danielle's life. She needs surgery immediately, Marcus said, as he rushed to the nurse's station, where Lisa was already on the phone paging OB/GYN. Adrenaline surged through him as he glanced over at the Mediscan console. Non-urgent, it still insisted, as though Danielle's deteriorating condition was nothing but a minor annoyance. Marcus's chest burned with frustration. She's critical, Lisa muttered under her breath. How does it keep getting it this wrong? Marcus shook his head. Because it doesn't see her, Lisa. It doesn't see any of them. By the time the surgical team took Danielle upstairs, Marcus's nerves felt like they were stretched to the breaking point. He leaned against the wall outside her empty room, trying to steady his breath. Lisa approached, her face pale with anger. Marcus, what would have happened if you hadn't caught that? She wouldn't have made it, he replied quietly. Lisa looked away, swallowing hard. We've got to do something. You can't keep fighting this alone. I'm not alone, Marcus said, giving her a faint smile. You're here. That's enough for now. That afternoon, Marcus's luck ran out. He had barely sat down to chart Danielle's case when his pager went off. A terse message flashed on the screen. Report to Dr. Adams's office immediately. Marcus's heart sank, but he grabbed the growing file of evidence from his desk and made his way to Adams's office. He knew what was coming, and he refused to go down without a fight. When he stepped inside, Dr. Adams sat with two board members, Mr. Frank Powell and Dr. Catherine Walsh, both of whom regarded Marcus with cool indifference. The air in the room was stifling, the silence heavier than usual. Dr. Brown, Adams said, his voice clipped. Please have a seat. Marcus sat, placing his file on his lap. What's this about? Adams folded his hands on the desk, his eyes narrowing. Your continued defiance of Mediscan's protocols has become a serious concern. Today alone, you ignored the AI's diagnosis and overstepped your authority. Marcus's pulse quickened, but he kept his voice calm. Because the AI was wrong. Again, I saved Danielle Harper's life. She had a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. Adams, how is that not urgent? That's not the point, Adams replied sharply. Protocols exist for a reason. If every doctor starts questioning the AI, we lose efficiency. This system works, Marcus. The board stands by it. Marcus looked to the two board members, searching their faces for some sign of understanding. The system doesn't work for everyone, he said, his voice steady. I have proof dozens of cases where Mediscan failed black patients, women, and people who didn't fit into its data patterns. The bias is built into the system, and it's costing lives. Enough, Frank Powell said coldly. You're making unfounded accusations. Do you know what you're risking here, Dr. Brown? This hospital's reputation, our partnerships, our progress. I'm risking people's lives if I stay quiet, Marcus shot back, his voice rising despite himself. This isn't about reputation. It's about doing what's right. Dr. Catherine Walsh finally spoke, her voice smooth and detached. "Dr. Brown, you're an excellent physician, but your refusal to cooperate has put us in a difficult position. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending review. You are not to treat patients or access hospital resources until further notice." Marcus froze. "You're suspending me? Until this matter is resolved," Adams said firmly. "You've left us no choice." Marcus stood, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "One day, you'll realize that." Adams didn't reply, his expression carved from stone. The walk out of the hospital felt surreal. Marcus's ID badge weighed heavily in his pocket as he moved through the halls where he had spent years saving lives. A few nurses and staff watched him pass, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Lisa found him near the exit. She looked at him, her face full of disbelief. "Marcus, what happened?" "They suspended me," he said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. Lisa swore softly under her breath, anger flashing in her eyes. "For saving Danielle? For telling the truth?" Marcus looked around at the hospital, at the people who moved on like nothing had happened. "It doesn't matter," he muttered. "They're too afraid to listen." Lisa stepped closer, her voice fierce. "They don't know who they're dealing with, Marcus. You're not going to give up, are you?" "No," he said, lifting his chin. "I'm not." She nodded firmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll figure this out. Together." Marcus looked at her, gratitude welling up in his chest. Lisa's unwavering belief in him was a small light in a dark moment. As he walked out into the cold afternoon air, Marcus felt the weight of what had happened settle over him. He had lost his job, his place in the hospital, but not his purpose. The people he had saved reminded him of that. And now he would find another way to fight, because lives depended on it. Marcus stood on the sidewalk outside Brighton Medical Center, the bitter wind biting against his face. The building towered behind him, its glass facade gleaming coldly in the afternoon light. It was strange, he thought, to feel so shut out from a place where he had spent nearly every day for years. His suspension felt less like punishment and more like exile. He pulled his coat tighter and began walking, his footsteps heavy against the pavement. The streets buzzed with life, people rushing to catch buses, mothers guiding their children home. But Marcus moved through it like a man adrift. He tried to clear his head, but the image of Danielle Harper's pale face kept resurfacing, along with the sting of Dr. Adams's words. "You're not irreplaceable." Marcus clenched his fists in his pockets. He had given everything to that hospital, his time, his energy, his heart. And now he was being pushed aside because he refused to play along. But the ache in his chest wasn't just from his pride being bruised. It was the knowledge that someone out there could be the next Jamal, the next Danielle, the next patient dismissed because of a machine that no one wanted to question. He needed to keep fighting. Even if the hospital didn't want to listen, someone else might. That evening, Marcus sat at his small dining table, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside him. His apartment was dim, save for the soft light from the lamp that illuminated the file in front of him. He had spread the cases out across the table, each sheet of paper a reminder of someone he had saved or someone the AI had nearly failed. His phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. He picked it up and saw Lisa's name flashing on the screen. "Hey," he said, his voice tired but steady. "You doing okay?" Lisa asked. Marcus glanced at the papers spread around him. "Define okay," Lisa sighed softly. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time to go bigger with this. The hospital's shutting you out, but what if we get someone else involved? Someone who can't ignore what you found." Marcus rubbed his temples. "You mean the media?" "Or someone in public health," Lisa replied. "There are people out there who care about medical ethics, Marcus. They'd take this seriously." Marcus hesitated. Going public felt drastic, dangerous even, but the truth was that he had already been backed into a corner. The board didn't want change. Adams didn't want change. If he wanted to protect patients, he would have to find allies outside the walls of Brighton Medical. You might be right, Marcus admitted, but I need more proof. Numbers, data, something they can't dismiss as just my word against theirs. Lisa's voice softened. Then let me help. I'll pull reports on every case we've had since Metascan was rolled out. It's risky, but I'm willing to do it. Marcus's chest tightened. He was deeply grateful for Lisa's loyalty, but the thought of her risking her job for him weighed heavily. Lisa, you don't have to. I want to, she interrupted. I've seen what you've seen. You're not crazy, Marcus. You're right. And if no one else will fight for these patients, then we'll do it ourselves. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing her words. Thank you, he said quietly. Get some rest, Lisa replied. Tomorrow we start digging. The next morning, Marcus headed to a local coffee shop just a few blocks from the hospital. It was a cozy place, the kind of spot where regulars greeted each other with small smiles and nods. Marcus had always liked it, though he rarely had time to stop in during his long shifts. Today, he sat up at a small table in the corner, his laptop open beside a steaming mug of coffee. The file of cases sat next to him, a stark contrast to the cheerful hum of the shop around him. He started compiling data dates, patient names, diagnoses given by Metascan, and the final outcomes that his instincts had caught. The patterns were undeniable. Over and over, the AI had missed critical conditions in Black patients, women, and individuals who didn't present typical symptoms. An elderly man nearby glanced at Marcus's open files and spoke kindly. You working on something big, son? Marcus looked up, startled by the interruption. The man smiled warmly, his face lined with years of living. You could say that, Marcus replied, offering a faint smile in return. Good for you, the man said, sipping his tea. We need people who care enough to dig into the hard stuff. Don't let anyone tell you it's not worth it. Marcus's chest swelled at the unexpected encouragement. Thank you. I appreciate that. The man waved it off. Just keep at it. The world's a better place when folks like you don't give up. As the man stood and left, Marcus sat for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the table. It was strange how a few kind words from a stranger could reaffirm everything he was fighting for. Later that afternoon, Lisa sent him a secure email filled with hospital data she had quietly pulled. She met him outside the coffee shop after her shift, her expression anxious but determined. I got it, she said, handing him a USB drive. It's all there, every diagnosis Metascan has made since it went live. I also pulled the outcomes so we can compare. Lisa, you could get in serious trouble for this, Marcus said, his voice low. She shrugged. So, could you? But this is bigger than both of us, Marcus. Someone has to put a stop to it. He took the drive, the weight of it heavy in his hand. Thank you, he said again. Lisa nodded, her tone fierce. We've come too far to stop now. Find what you need, and we'll take it to someone who'll listen. Marcus tucked the drive into his coat pocket and promised himself he wouldn't waste the opportunity. That night, Marcus worked late into the evening, cross-referencing Lisa's data with his own notes. The numbers were staggering. In nearly 80% of the cases involving Black patients, Metascan AI had either misdiagnosed the condition or downgraded its urgency. 80%. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the spreadsheet on his screen. His pulse pounded in his ears. This wasn't just a mistake or a flaw, it was systemic. The AI wasn't designed to hurt anyone, but the data it had been trained on was inherently biased. And now, patients were paying the price. Marcus glanced at the clock. It was past midnight, and his body screamed for rest, but his mind wouldn't let him stop. He clicked open a blank email and began typing, Dr. Patel, I hope this message finds you well. Dr. Sanjay Patel had been one of the lead developers on Metascan AI before leaving the project last year. Marcus didn't know the full story, But rumors suggested Dr. Patel had grown disillusioned with the system's limitations. If anyone would understand what Marcus had uncovered, it would be him. Marcus finished the email, attached the evidence he had compiled, and hit send. He stared at the screen for a moment before exhaling deeply. It was a small step, but it felt like a turning point. As Marcus shut down his laptop, the quiet of his apartment seemed less suffocating than usual. He thought of Jamal, of Danielle, of all the patients whose lives he had fought for. He wasn't giving up. He couldn't. The fight wasn't over yet. Morning sunlight streamed through the small window of Marcus's apartment, though it did little to shake his exhaustion. He had barely slept. The blue glow of his laptop screen imprinted on his eyes from hours of analyzing data. Yet the weariness was tempered by resolve. He poured himself a cup of coffee, holding it tightly as he sat back down at the table. The email he had sent to Dr. Sanjay Patel the night before sat unanswered, and though doubt gnawed at him, he pushed it aside. Patel was his best shot, someone who had once believed in Mediscan AI, but had walked away for reasons Marcus didn't yet know. As Marcus sipped his coffee, his phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. He grabbed it quickly, hope flickering in his chest when he saw an unfamiliar email address flashing on the screen. Dr. Sanjay Patel. Subject: Let's talk. Dr. Brown, I read your message and the data you attached. You're right, this system has flaws, ones I tried to address before I left. It's worse than I thought. If you're willing, let's meet. I think I can help you prove what's happening. I'm at Whitmore Cafe this afternoon, 2 p.m. Sanjay Patel. Marcus exhaled, the tension in his shoulders loosening slightly. Finally, he thought. Someone who understood. Someone who listened. He picked up the phone and texted Lisa, knowing she would want an update. Marcus. He responded, I'm meeting him today. Lisa. Finally, keep me posted, and don't let your coffee get cold for once. Marcus chuckled faintly before shutting his laptop. It was a small moment of progress, but progress nonetheless. Whitmore Cafe sat tucked away on a quiet street near the hospital, a small, unassuming spot with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh pastries in the air. Marcus arrived a few minutes early, scanning the tables until he spotted a man sitting in the far corner. Dr. Sanjay Patel looked younger than Marcus expected, perhaps mid-30s, with a trimmed beard and dark circles under his eyes, as though the past year had weighed on him. He looked up as Marcus approached, offering a cautious smile. You must be Dr. Brown, Patel said, standing to shake Marcus's hand. His grip was firm, his voice steady. Call me Marcus, he replied, taking a seat across the table. Thanks for agreeing to meet. Patel nodded. I'm glad you reached out. You're not the first to notice something's wrong with Mediscan, but you're the first to back it up with hard data. Marcus's brow furrowed. You mean others have raised concerns? A few, Patel admitted, his expression darkening. But they didn't have proof or the courage to speak out. Brighton Medical has too much riding on this technology for anyone to challenge it without consequences. Marcus leaned forward. Why did you leave the project? Patel sighed, running a hand through his hair. When Mediscan was first developed, the goal was pure better outcomes for all patients. But the data used to train it? He hesitated, as though choosing his words carefully. It was flawed. Most of the training data came from old studies in hospitals where racial bias already existed. If black patients were underdiagnosed in the past, then the AI learned to do the same thing. It doesn't know it's biased, it just mirrors the patterns it was taught. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. And you knew about this? I suspected it, Patel admitted, guilt flickering in his eyes. I tried to fix it, to retrain the system with better, more representative data. But Brighton's board wouldn't allow it. They said it was too costly, too time-consuming. They didn't want delays. So I left. Marcus shook his head, anger boiling beneath his calm exterior. And now patients are paying the price. people like Jamal Carter, Danielle Harper. I've got the cases to prove it, Patel nodded gravely. I believe you, Marcus, but cases alone won't be enough. The board will dismiss it as anecdotal. What you need is to expose the systemic bias in the AI's design, something they can't refute. Marcus's chest tightened. And how do I do that? I can help you, Patel replied firmly. I still have access to early versions of the algorithm before the hospital locked it down. If I can cross-reference your cases with the system's decision-making process, we can show how it fails certain patients. Marcus stared at him, absorbing the weight of what Patel was offering. It was a risk, a huge one for both of them, but it was the first real chance he had to take Mediscan down. Why are you helping me? Marcus asked quietly. Patel's gaze softened. Because I was part of the problem. I let myself believe the system would work itself out, that it was still better than human error. I was wrong. I didn't speak up when I had the chance, and I regret it every day. You're doing what I should have done. Marcus nodded, feeling a spark of respect for the man across from him. So what's next? I'll need time to run the comparisons, Patel explained. Give me the cases you've collected. If I can trace the AI's decision-making logic, we'll have the proof you need. Real proof. Marcus pulled a flash drive from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. Everything's on there. Patel took it, slipping it into his bag. Give me a few days. I'll contact you as soon as I find something. As Marcus stood to leave, Patel held out a hand. You're brave, Marcus. I mean that. Don't let them silence you. Marcus shook his hand firmly. I won't. The next few days stretched on with excruciating slowness. Marcus stayed home, unable to set foot in the hospital that had cast him aside. His apartment felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in as the hours ticked by. He filled the time rereading case files, walking the empty streets, and checking his email obsessively for any word from Patel. Lisa visited him on the second day, carrying a bag of groceries. You look like you haven't eaten in a week, she said, pushing her way into the apartment. Food's not exactly a priority right now, Marcus replied, his voice flat. Well, it should be, Lisa shot back, unloading bread, eggs, and fruit onto his counter. You can't take down an entire hospital system on an empty stomach. Marcus couldn't help but smile faintly. Thanks, Lisa. She looked at him seriously. Any word from Patel? Not yet. Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder. It'll come, and when it does, we'll figure out the next step. You're not doing this alone. He nodded, feeling a familiar warmth in his chest at her words. It was easy to feel like he was carrying this burden alone, but moments like this reminded him that he wasn't. On the fourth day, just as Marcus was beginning to lose hope, his phone buzzed. It was an email from Patel, Dr. Sanjay Patel. Subject: You were right. Marcus, I've analyzed the cases and compared them to Mediscan's logic. The bias isn't just subtle, it's systemic. The AI consistently deprioritizes Black patients and women based on outdated parameters in its training data. I've compiled everything into a report. We need to meet. This is the proof you've been waiting for. Marcus exhaled sharply, his heart racing. He stared at the message for a long moment, the reality sinking in. This was it, the proof he needed. He picked up the phone and called Lisa. She answered on the first ring. What's going on? Patel found it, Marcus said, his voice trembling with equal parts relief and adrenaline. We've got the proof, Lisa. Real proof. There was a pause on the line before Lisa replied, her voice steady. Then it's time to make them listen. Marcus hung up and sat back, gripping the phone tightly. He didn't know what the next few days would bring, whether the hospital would fight him, whether the board would try to bury the truth. But for the first time since this fight began, he felt like the tide was turning. The truth was coming to light, and he wouldn't stop until everyone saw it. Marcus stared at the email long after the screen had gone dark. Patel's words reverberated in his head like a heartbeat. The bias isn't subtle, It's systemic. Proof. Real proof. For days, he had fought the creeping fear that no one would believe him, that the evidence would never be enough, that the voices of the vulnerable would remain unheard. But now, a tangible report sat in his inbox, filled with data, patterns, and logic that no hospital board or administrator could refute. He picked up his phone and texted Lisa. "Marcus, we're meeting Patel tomorrow. He has everything. It's time to move forward." Lisa. "About time. Let's take this fight to them." Marcus set his phone down, the relief almost overwhelming. This wasn't the end, but for the first time, it felt like a beginning. He exhaled, long and slow, staring out his window at the quiet night. The next afternoon, Marcus met Patel at the same cafe. This time, Patel arrived with a thick folder tucked under his arm and a determined look on his face. He set the folder on the table as Marcus slid into the seat across from him. "I double-checked everything," Patel said without preamble. "The system's bias isn't a fluke, it's built into its foundation. Look at this." He opened the folder and laid out several printouts. Patel pointed to a flowchart that outlined the AI's decision-making process. "Here's where it prioritizes risk levels. But notice what it's based on: historical data that disproportionately underdiagnosed conditions in Black patients and women. The AI assumes those biases are normal." Marcus studied the diagrams, his stomach twisting as Patel spoke. "So it's not just learning to replicate bias, it's amplifying it," Marcus said, his voice low. Patel nodded grimly. "Exactly. The system wasn't designed to hurt people, but the people who created it overlooked what was right in front of them." Marcus flipped through the case comparisons Patel had compiled. In each instance, Metascan AI had failed to flag critical symptoms, resulting in misdiagnoses or delays in treatment. And overwhelmingly, those cases involved patients like Jamal Carter or Danielle Harper. "This is undeniable," Marcus said quietly. "There's no way they can brush this aside as anecdotal." Patel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Here's the catch. The hospital board won't want this to come out. They've poured millions into this system, and they'll do anything to protect it." Marcus looked up, his eyes sharp. "So, what do we do?" Patel hesitated before answering. "You take this to the media, to public health officials, to anyone who will listen. We make it too big to ignore." Marcus leaned back, absorbing the weight of Patel's suggestion. He had known this moment was coming, but the reality of it felt heavier than he'd expected. Going public wasn't just risky, it would put him in direct opposition to people with power and money. They would fight back. They would discredit him. And Patel was right. Brighton Medical would do everything in its power to bury the truth. "You still want to do this?" Patel asked quietly. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes." Because this wasn't about him. It was about Jamal, about Danielle, about the patients who never got the care they deserved because of a system no one wanted to question. It was about the families who trusted the hospital to do what was right and were failed instead. That evening, Marcus met Lisa at his apartment to go over Patel's findings. She sat on the edge of his couch, flipping through the report with a mix of awe and disbelief. "This is airtight," she said, shaking her head. "There's no way they can deny this." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Patel said we need to go public to take this to someone who can force the hospital's hand." Lisa looked up, her expression sharp. "Good. If Adams and the board won't listen, then the public will." Marcus hesitated. "It's going to get ugly, Lisa. They'll come after me, maybe even Patel, and I don't want you caught in the crossfire." Lisa rolled her eyes. "Nice try. I've been in this with you from the start. I'm not backing out now." Her loyalty caught him off guard. Marcus had spent so much of his life carrying burdens alone that it still surprised him when someone else stepped in to help shoulder the weight. "Thank you," he said quietly. She gave him a firm look. "Don't thank me yet. We're not done." The next day, Marcus contacted an investigative reporter named Clara Reynolds, someone he had met once during a health fair hosted by the hospital years ago. She had a reputation for holding institutions accountable, and he knew she wouldn't shy away from this story. He sent her Patel's report and a brief message explaining what he had uncovered. To his surprise, she called him within the hour. "Dr. Brown." Clara's voice was crisp and professional. "I read what you sent me. If this is true, it's a bombshell. But I need more than just data. I need your story." "You'll get it," Marcus replied. "Whatever you need, I'll share it." They agreed to meet at her office downtown later that evening. Clara's office was modest but tidy, the walls lined with framed headlines from her previous investigations. When Marcus and Lisa arrived, Clara shook their hands firmly and gestured for them to sit. "Tell me everything," Clara said, pulling out a notebook. Marcus took a breath and began. He told her about Jamal Carter, about Danielle Harper, about Mr. Caldwell and Cynthia Moore. He spoke of the Metascan system and how it consistently failed patients who didn't fit neatly into its algorithms. He shared Patel's findings, his own suspicions, and the hospital's refusal to listen. Clara took notes furiously, occasionally asking for clarification. When Marcus finished, the room fell silent for a moment. "This is huge," Clara said finally. "If Patel's report holds up, Brighton Medical is going to have a lot to answer for." Lisa chimed in, her voice firm. "It's not just about Brighton Medical. It's about how we trust technology without questioning who it's really designed for. This could be happening everywhere." Clara nodded. "You're right. This isn't just a hospital problem, it's a systemic problem. I'll need to verify Patel's findings and get statements from the hospital, but we're running this story. People need to know." Marcus felt a mix of relief and dread. It was happening after weeks of fighting. The truth was finally going to come out. "What happens next?" Marcus asked. Clara leaned back, her expression serious. "I'll reach out to Brighton Medical for comment, but be prepared. They're going to come after you hard. They'll call you a troublemaker, discredit your work, maybe even threaten legal action." "I don't care," Marcus said quietly, "as long as the truth gets out." Clara studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're brave, Dr. Brown. I wish more people in your position were like you." That night, Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The quiet hum of the city drifted through his window, but his mind refused to settle. He thought of all the patients he had fought for their faces clear in his memory, and he thought of the ones he hadn't been able to save. This fight wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. But for the first time, he felt like he wasn't fighting alone. Lisa's unwavering loyalty, Patel's courage to expose the truth, and Clara's determination to tell the story, all of it, reminded him that change, though slow and painful, was possible. And in the morning, the world would know the truth. The morning the article dropped, Marcus woke to the sharp buzz of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. It rattled against the wood like an alarm bell. He groaned, rubbing his eyes before reaching for the phone. Lisa had texted him, "Clara's article is live. Check it out. Everyone's talking about it." Marcus shot upright, his heart hammering. He opened the link Lisa had sent. The headline hit him like a punch to the chest. "When AI Gets It Wrong, How a Cutting-Edge System Endangers Black Patients and Women at Brighton Medical Center." By Clara Reynolds. Below the headline, Clara's crisp, unflinching words laid everything bare. The patterns of misdiagnosis, the systemic bias in Metascan AI, Patel's findings, and Marcus's own accounts of the lives nearly lost. Patient names. Jamal Carter, Danielle Harper, Mr. Caldwell were listed alongside their stories, their humanity laid bare for all to see. "The AI trusted to save lives has a dangerous flaw," Clara wrote, "and Brighton Medical's refusal to listen to its own physicians has put patients at risk." Marcus exhaled slowly, his pulse steadying. It was all there, the truth. He scrolled further and saw Patel's analysis. Graphs and data illuminated how the AI's training data had amplified historical biases, perpetuating the very disparities the hospital claimed it was trying to solve. As Marcus set his phone down, his emotions swirled relief, dread, and a cautious hope. They couldn't bury this now. The story was out, and the world was listening. Marcus hadn't even showered when Lisa's call came through. "Marcus, you need to get down here." "What's going on?" he asked, still processing the morning's events. "The hospital's in chaos," she said quickly. "The board called an emergency meeting. The media's already swarming the entrance, and the staff's talking about the article. Some are on your side, some aren't, but everyone's got an opinion." Marcus ran a hand down his face, his mind racing. "What about Adams?" "He's furious," Lisa replied. "I wouldn't be surprised if he's planning to throw you under the bus to save himself." "Of course he is," Marcus muttered. "I'll be there soon." By the time Marcus arrived at Brighton Medical Center, the once familiar entrance felt foreign. News vans lined the curb, their antennas pointed skyward, reporters with microphones pacing outside. Marcus kept his head down as he slipped in through a side door, but he could hear snatches of conversation. Systemic bias, Metascan AI, Brighton Medical under fire. He avoided eye contact, moving quickly toward the ER. Lisa was waiting for him just inside, her expression tense. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," Marcus replied, though his pulse told a different story. "What's the staff saying?" "Mixed reactions," Lisa admitted. "Some think you're a hero for speaking up. Others, not so much. Adams and the board are blaming you, saying you leaked confidential information." Marcus scoffed. "Of course they are. What else?" Lisa gave him a hard look. "Patients are talking too, Marcus. People are asking whether they can trust the AI at all. The board can't ignore this forever." Before Marcus could respond, a familiar voice echoed from down the hallway. "Dr. Brown." Marcus turned to see Dr. Adams approaching, flanked by two other board members. His face was tight with anger, his usual calm veneer cracked. "Dr. Brown, we need to speak." "Now," Adams said curtly. Marcus met his gaze, unflinching. "Fine, let's talk." The conference room felt as cold as Marcus remembered. Adams stood at the head of the table, his posture rigid, while board members Frank Powell and Dr. Catherine Walsh sat nearby, their faces unreadable. Marcus took a seat opposite them, his shoulders square. Patel's report and Clara's article had emboldened him, even as Adams's glare bored into him. "You've put this hospital in a very difficult position," Adams began, his voice sharp. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "What I've done," Marcus replied evenly, "is tell the truth." Adams's face darkened. "The media is outside our doors. Patients are canceling appointments, and staff are questioning our systems. This article has caused serious damage to the hospital's reputation." "Your reputation?" Marcus shot back. "What about the patients? What about Jamal Carter, who almost died because of Metascan's failure? Or Danielle Harper, whose internal bleeding was labeled non-urgent? This isn't about the hospital, it's about the people you've failed." Frank Powell cleared his throat, trying to sound measured. "Dr. Brown, we take these accusations seriously, but you went about this the wrong way. Instead of working with us, you went to the media." Marcus laughed bitterly. "I tried to work with you. I came to you, Adams. I showed you the cases. And you told me to drop it. You called me a troublemaker. What was I supposed to do, sit back and watch more patients suffer?" Dr. Catherine Walsh finally spoke, her voice calmer than the others. "Dr. Brown, we understand your frustration, but this is a complicated situation. Metascan AI was intended to save lives, not harm them." "It's not saving everyone," Marcus said firmly. "You built it on flawed data. You ignored bias in the training sets, and now it's amplifying the same disparities it was meant to fix. Dr. Patel's findings prove it. Ignoring this won't make it go away." Adams slammed his hand on the table. You think you're some kind of hero? Marcus stared at him, his voice steady. I think I'm a doctor doing his job, putting patients first. Can you say the same? A heavy silence followed. For the first time, Adams had no immediate retort. By the end of the day, news of Clara's article had spread like wildfire. Patients were calling in droves, demanding answers. Doctors and nurses huddled in groups, their conversations hushed but charged with urgency. Some staff members avoided Marcus entirely, their gazes cold and suspicious, while others approached him quietly to offer whispered words of support. Lisa found him by the nurse's station, handing him a cup of coffee. You should have seen Adams after you left that meeting, she said with a smirk. I think you rattled him. He's going to fight this, Marcus replied. The board's not going to admit fault unless they have to. Then we'll make them, Lisa said. The staff's already talking about it. Some of the younger doctors are on your side. They're saying we should reevaluate Mediscan completely. Marcus nodded slowly, hope flickering in his chest. The tide was shifting, even if it was slow. Maybe this is the start, he murmured. Lisa nudged his arm. It's because of you, Marcus. You didn't give up. He looked at her, gratitude swelling inside him. Neither did you. That night, Marcus returned to his apartment, exhausted but strangely at peace. He sat on the couch with Oliver, his rescue cat, purring softly beside him. The news played faintly on his television, reporters discussing the article and the implications of Mediscan's flaws. Brighton Medical faces mounting pressure to suspend the use of its AI diagnostic system pending further review. Marcus smiled faintly. The fight wasn't over, but people were listening now. Patients would get a second look. Doctors might trust their instincts a little more. And maybe, just maybe, hospitals would think twice before trusting machines blindly. He picked up his phone to see a text from Patel. Patel. The board reached out. They want me to help fix Mediscan. Maybe they're finally ready to listen. Marcus exhaled deeply, relief washing over him. Change was slow. It always was. But it was coming. As Marcus leaned back on the couch, he thought of Jamal, of Danielle, of every patient who deserved better. This is for you, he thought quietly. And for the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to rest. Days passed, and the storm that began with Clara's article only grew stronger. Brighton Medical Center became the focal point of a national conversation about racial bias in healthcare technology. News outlets ran segments on AI flaws, with Marcus's name mentioned alongside patient stories. Outside the hospital, reporters hounded the board for answers. Inside, staff tensions were palpable, divided between those who defended the AI and those who now questioned it. Marcus stayed home during those days of chaos. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Waiting to see what Brighton Medical would do. Waiting to see if the patients he had fought for would finally matter to the people in charge. On a quiet Thursday morning, the call finally came. Marcus was sitting on his couch with Oliver curled in his lap when his phone buzzed. The screen flashed an unfamiliar number. For a moment, he hesitated. He had grown used to being a pariah, a name thrown around in meetings with disdain. He had almost stopped believing the hospital would ever reach out to him. He swiped to answer. Dr. Brown? The voice on the other end was measured and calm. Dr. Catherine Walsh. Marcus straightened slightly, his heart picking up speed. Yes, this is Marcus. There was a brief pause before she continued. I'm calling on behalf of the hospital board. We've reviewed Dr. Patel's findings and launched our own investigation into Mediscan AI's processes. Marcus held his breath, waiting. You were right, Walsh said finally. The system's bias is undeniable. It overlooked patterns, ignored risk factors, and harmed patients. We failed them, and we failed you. Marcus blinked, stunned into silence. It was the first time anyone at Brighton Medical had acknowledged the truth out loud. What does this mean? He asked carefully. We've decided to suspend Metascan AI indefinitely, Walsh replied. We're bringing Dr. Patel back on board to help overhaul the system and retrain it with better, more representative data. The hospital will be issuing a public apology, as well as taking steps to address broader disparities in patient care. Marcus exhaled, tension leaving his body in waves. For the first time in weeks, it felt like he could breathe. And you, Dr. Brown, Walsh continued, her tone softening, we'd like you to return to Brighton Medical. Marcus frowned slightly. You want me to come back? Yes, you're a critical part of this hospital, Marcus. You fought for what was right when no one else would, and we need voices like yours now more than ever. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He thought about the nights spent reviewing charts, the heated arguments with Dr. Adams, the patients he'd saved by trusting his instincts over the AI. He remembered how it felt to be silenced, dismissed, told he was a troublemaker. But he also thought of Lisa's quiet support, Patel's courage, Clara's determination to tell the truth, and the faces of patients like Jamal and Danielle, who were alive because someone had spoken up. All right, Marcus said finally. I'll come back, but things have to change, really change. They will, Walsh promised. We'll need your help to make sure of it. When Marcus walked into Brighton Medical Center the next morning, it felt both familiar and different. The halls were still bustling, the steady hum of the hospital unchanged, but people looked at him differently now. Nurses nodded in acknowledgement, and a few junior doctors stopped him to shake his hand. Welcome back, Dr. Brown, one said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It's good to have you here. Lisa was waiting for him near the nurses' station, her arms crossed and a triumphant smile on her face. Well, look who's back, she teased as he approached. Marcus smiled faintly. You don't sound surprised. I'm not, she said simply. I knew they'd come around eventually. They couldn't ignore the truth forever. He glanced around at the staff moving briskly through the ER. It feels different today. Because it is different, Lisa replied. You changed things, Marcus. Maybe not everything, but enough to make a difference. Before he could answer, an overhead announcement crackled through the speakers. Dr. Brown to exam room 5. Dr. Brown to exam room 5. Marcus looked at Lisa, his expression calm and resolute. Back to work. She grinned. Welcome home, Doc. The patient in exam room 5 was a young black woman in her mid-20s, Tasha Collins. She sat hunched on the bed, clutching her stomach and wincing with every movement. Marcus took her chart from a nurse and scanned it briefly. Hi, Tasha, Marcus said warmly as he stepped into the room. I'm Dr. Brown. What brings you in today? It's this pain, she said softly. Right here. She gestured to her abdomen. It's been bad all day. Marcus nodded and sat down on the stool beside her. We're going to figure this out, okay? He took her vitals, asked careful questions, and then performed a gentle exam. The symptoms were subtle, nothing that screamed urgent at first glance. The AI might have flagged it as non-critical, but Marcus didn't need a machine to tell him what to do. We'll run some tests, he said calmly. An ultrasound and some blood work to make sure everything's okay. Tasha looked up at him, her eyes uncertain. You think it's serious? I think it's worth taking seriously, Marcus replied, offering a reassuring smile. We'll make sure you're all right. As he stepped out of the room, Lisa was waiting in the hallway, watching him closely. Trusting your gut again? Always, Marcus replied. Some things never change. Lisa chuckled softly. Good. The days that followed marked the beginning of a new chapter for Brighton Medical Center. Metascan AI remained suspended, and the hospital worked with Dr. Patel to retrain the system using data that truly reflected all patients. Training programs were implemented to address bias in decision-making, both human and technological, and staff began having honest, often difficult conversations about trust, accountability, and equity. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, not as an adversary, but as a leader. The same people who once dismissed him now looked to him for guidance, and he embraced the role with quiet humility. One evening, Marcus received a visit from Jamal Carter's mother, Trina. She stood at the nurse's station, holding a small, handwritten card. "I heard you were back," she said with a smile. "I just wanted to thank you again for saving my boy." Marcus took the card, warmth spreading in his chest. "You don't have to thank me, Mrs. Carter." "I do," she insisted softly, "because you listened when no one else would. And that's something special." Marcus glanced down at the card, which simply read, "Thank you for fighting for us." As Trina walked away, Marcus slipped the card into his pocket, next to the faded photograph of his parents that he carried everywhere. He knew they would be proud, not because he had won a fight, but because he had never stopped fighting for what was right. That night, Marcus returned home to his small apartment, Oliver leaping up to greet him. He sank onto the couch, the hum of the city drifting in through the window. The road ahead was still long. Bias, inequity, and flawed systems wouldn't disappear overnight. But for the first time, change felt possible. Marcus leaned back, staring at the ceiling as a sense of quiet peace washed over him. He hadn't done it alone. Lisa's unwavering support, Patel's courage to speak out, Clara's determination to tell the truth, and the patients who trusted him, it had taken all of them to get here. And that, Marcus thought, was how real change happened. One voice, one action, one life at a time. In the weeks that followed, Brighton Medical Center became a symbol of change, not just for one hospital, but for an entire healthcare system learning to confront its flaws. Articles appeared highlighting Marcus's persistence and the ripple effect of his actions. Patients like Jamal and Danielle became living reminders of why challenging the status quo mattered. Marcus continued his work, leading with compassion and integrity. He no longer felt like he was fighting alone. His colleagues began to trust their instincts again, and patients were given the care they deserved, not just the care an algorithm deemed appropriate. Late one evening, Marcus found himself walking past Jamal Carter's recovery room. The boy sat up in bed, laughing softly with his mother as they watched a movie. Seeing Jamal healthy and happy reminded Marcus why he had started this fight. He smiled faintly and kept walking, the familiar hum of the hospital steadying him. For all its flaws, this was still the place where he belonged, a place where doing what was right could still change lives. As Marcus stepped into the night air, the city lights stretching out before him, he thought of the people who had stood beside him. Lisa, Patel, Clara, and the patients whose stories had guided his path. The journey was far from over, but hope had taken root. And that, Marcus thought, was enough to keep going. If you've enjoyed this story and want more narratives that shine a light on perseverance, justice, and hope, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll join a community that believes in the power of storytelling to inspire, challenge, and connect us all. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time with more stories that matter. Remember, every voice matters. Every story counts.